I've loved the Revenant makeup since I first saw the film, and there's been quite a few interviews that have been written about it since, with so much detail about what they used to create it. So I've gotten as many of the products as I could that they originally used for the makeup to recreate it here and now. You know I love research. I'll link these articles below. The best one, in my opinion, is written by one of the actual prosthetic makeup artists to Leonardo DiCaprio. Her name is Sian Grigg, and there's also great interviews with both Sian and the other main prosthetic makeup artist to Leo, who's called Duncan Jarman. So they used Prosaide transfers for most of his little facial wounds and scars and frostbite. It was Prosaide transfer material paste to be exact. So I started by sculpting out these little wounds on a face cast that I painted with acrylic paint so that it would match the colour of my Chavant NSP medium clay, and I will end up eventually flat moulding these. So to get the clay off the cast after I've sculpted everything, I firstly put down 2 layers of dental separator or Alcote. So what this will do is it will enable me to float these pieces off in water after I've sculpted it ready for moulding, and I'll show you that process in a bit. You can skip all of this and go straight to sculpting everything on a flat surface like a tile. You definitely don't need a face cast to do this. I just like working on one to get a better sense of scale and also matching skin textures. I started by placing the clay where I wanted the wounds to be based on photos from Leo from the movie, and I was smoothing it out to try and get a nice blended edge, and then I started adding in skin texture and pore texture. Then I started carving into the clay to make those frostbitten patches in the wounds. As you can see from the sculpt, they are very small pieces, they're going to be very thin, so Prosaide transfer material is the perfect material to make these. And then I finished the sculpt by softening those wounds and adding back in some skin texture and some pores around the edges. Then I will submerge this Hydrocal plaster face into cold water for 24 hours. This is a floating off process, so basically this will break down that Alcote layer that's between the face cast and the clay, and then the clay will start to float off the face cast and I can gently pry it off. You can see here that a lot of the acrylic paint floated off too, but that doesn't really affect anything. Now I placed my sculpts onto a flat surface. I usually use a tile, but I'm using clear perspex today. So this is why you could just sculpt them straight into a flat surface here, but I do enjoy sculpting on a face cast more. The first step is gently flattening the clay against the board and then blending out those edges. Then I will need to retexture anything that I've changed. Once the sculpts are complete and any excess clay around them has been cleaned off, I'll put a flat circle of clay around these pieces for flashing. I've recently discovered the joys of using a pasta maker to flatten out all the clay so it's all an even thickness, and then I cut this into strips and I place it around each wound. I will also take that 90-degree angle off the edge and make it a bit more rounded, as a rounded edge just comes out of a flat mold. It just gets demolded so much easier. Next, I will build a wall around this out of wet clay so that I can pour silicone over the top of it all to make my molds. I'm using Pinkysil Silicone, which I think is an Australian specific silicone, but it is a platinum cure silicone and it has the perfect firmness for flat molds. It's a little bit firmer than Platsil Gel 10. Once that is cured, I will clean out all of my clay and I'll snip off any of the higher up areas of silicone around the edges so that it will sit flat when I am filling it. I also cut all of the wounds into individual molds so that they're a bit easier to handle. The first step when you're making Prosaide transfers, once you have your flat molds, is releasing the silicone. So I'm using a spray release called Epoxy Parfilm 4. Then I get this double-sided release paper from Prosaide Transfer Materials, and I really like using this because you don't have to worry about which side has the release. It's got both sides coated, which is smart and eliminates any chance of messing it up, which has definitely happened to me in the past. So I cut this to the size of each mold, and then I'll put that to the side for now. Then I fill my molds using Prosaide Transfer Material paste in light flesh color. I will say though, I think my favorite color is their pink 5. It tends to match my skin tone and paler skin tones a little bit better than the light flesh. So to fill it, I will use a tongue compressor and I will gently bend the mold so it's a little bit more open, and then I'll spatula in that Prosaide Transfer Material paste. You want to overfill it a little bit to eliminate the chances of there being air bubbles when you put the release film on top. So I'll put the release paper on top while sliding a tongue compressor over the paper just to try to chase out any air bubbles, and then starting from the center, I'll push the material up, down, and side to side until I can see that cutting edge around the sculpt is mostly free from material, so then I can get a really nice thin edge on these pieces. If you push too hard, you can create a dip and that will kind of bounce back and get air bubbles, and if you don't push hard enough, then you can have steep edges instead of thin edges on these, so it is definitely about finding the right balance through practice. After all the molds are filled and they all have that acetate release paper on them, I will transfer them to my freezer for about 2 to 3 hours to freeze. So they do need to be fully frozen to be demolded. If the center is still a bit wet and gooey, it won't retain the detail of your sculpt and it will not come out of the mold easily. So you can see the color change here after freezing. It does go darker. If you see any light patches, that means it probably isn't fully frozen yet. And obviously the bigger the pieces, the longer it's going to need to freeze. To demold these, I turn them over so that acetate release film is on the table, and then I'll start at one edge and I try to keep the release paper as flat on the table as possible while bending the silicone mold as far back and away from it as possible. And this usually gets the pieces out pretty easily. So you can see we've got nice clean edges here, and I'm going to remove that flashing from the piece now. We don't need it to apply them like you do with silicone pieces. Its main purpose was for that overflow catchment area while smoothing out the Prosaide under the release film, or else that Prosaide would have gone over the edges of the mold and it would have gotten all over my fingers. Now these pieces need to be dehydrated before you can apply them. This makes them really strong and more transparent, so it's easier to get a nice skin tone match. You can dehydrate them just in the open air, just by leaving them out on a table somewhere, but depending on the humidity and the air temperature, it can take anywhere from a week to a month. You can speed this process up by putting them into a food dehydrator, but you need to put the setting on as low as possible for the heat, or else you can get air bubbles and basically cook them. So with a food dehydrator on low, these took me about 3 or 4 days to dehydrate, and the thinner your pieces are, the quicker they will dehydrate. You can see this one here has a white patch on the back, which means it hasn't fully dehydrated there, but little spots like that you can get away with if you are in a rush, as long as most of it is dehydrated. The Prosaide transfers are absolutely beautiful, they're super fast to apply, but you do need a lot of prep time to be able to dehydrate them properly first. If these are freshly dehydrated like mine are, they will still be sticky, but if you've powdered them for storage, you will need alcohol to remove the powder. Then I cut out some Prosaide transfer material transfer paper, or water slide paper as it's also called. It's just like temporary tattoo paper. Then I place the Prosaide transfer down onto it and I press firmly enough to get it to stick to the transfer paper so I can easily peel away that acetate paper. If I press too hard, I can damage the detail and squish this. It doesn't bounce back like silicone does, so it's finding the right balance of pressure again. Also, you don't want to do this more than 10 to 15 minutes before you need it to apply it, as the longer it sits on the paper, the flatter it will get, and it can destroy your detail if you leave it sitting like this for too long. Now to apply this, I firstly hold it up to a light to trace around the back with a pencil where the edges are, as you're going in blind just looking at the back of the paper when you're positioning it, so an outline helps immensely. Then you press it into the skin to get it to stick, and you don't need an adhesive because the entire piece is adhesive. And then you use a damp cloth or tissue or paper towel to release the water slide paper, just like you do a temporary tattoo. I found this can take a minute or two to fully soak through and release, but you will feel the paper start to slide off on its own, and then you know it's ready. You can easily slide it off, and then your piece is on the skin ready to go. I apply all of my pieces first, and then I will go around the edges with a cotton tip, dampened with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol just to remove any excess Prosaide and get it all blended in nicely. Not every edge will need this, just a couple of places. This is a way faster process than blending off the cap plastic from silicone pieces, and I must admit I do like the edges that Prosaide transfers give me more. Next, I like to go around the edges with a creamy Prosaide. It's a little bit thicker than the normal Prosaide adhesive, and I'll apply it using a red stipple sponge in self-locking tweezers so I don't get sticky fingers. I just like this because I feel like it really seals down that outer edge so the makeup can last through like 12-hour shooting days with no touch-ups on the edges. And I feel like it gives a really smooth blending down onto the skin if your sculpt isn't as thin around the edges as you'd have liked. It's not a vital step, it's just something that I like to do. Now, Prosaide transfers are quite sticky when you first apply them, so I like to seal them with a matte sealer. I've been in love with Bluebird's matte sealer recently, so I thin this down with isopropyl alcohol and I paint this over every transfer. This will help with the tackiness, it will help to reduce the shine, and it will help alcohol colors and bloods to sit better on the pieces. Next, I use some alcohol activated paints and my stipple brush just to try to lighten these pieces a little bit so that they match Alex's skin tones better. Then I start detailing the center of the frostbite with subtle pinks and reds. Leah's makeup was definitely more subtle than this. I think I overpainted mine a little, so keep that in mind if you're going to recreate this. I also added some pinky reds to the little cuts and a little bit of a purpley blue pink to the scar on the forehead and on the bridge of the nose. Then through the gash on the other frostbitten cheek, I added just a little bit more blood red. Next, I will break up the skin to make it look really weathered using Skin Illustrator glazing sprays in Sunburn and Tan 1. I use my stipple brush over the nose, the forehead, and the cheeks. I love how subtle and natural these sprays can be while also making such a huge difference to the overall look. Next, I use some glazing gels, which are a little bit thicker to create this bruise around the eye. I really like using these around the eye area because they are water-based, and for this I used the Bruise Red, the Deep Purple, and the Black and Blue colors. Then to add the dirt around the face, I am going to use the same products and technique that they used on Leo. So they used KY Jelly, patted over where they want the dirt to be, and then I used PPI Dirtworks. I'm using the color Dark Brun in a Dirtworks bag, and you just pat this into the skin where the KY Jelly is. Then around the eyes, around the crow's feet area, I got Alex to squint really hard, and then I patted the dirt on top, and this will give you some really nice lines around that area. For the hair, I'm also using the same stuff that they used on Leo. I know they had trouble finding a hair product that wouldn't completely freeze in the crazy conditions that they were shooting, so they ended up using a mixture of glycerin and water, which is what I'm also using on Alex's hair, just to make it look unwashed. And now I'm gonna hand lay a beard on Alex. Obviously this look is going to be way easier if you already have a beard like Leo did, but it is quite a long beard. I feel like it would take a while to grow it out, so this is an option if you don't already have a beard. So I'm starting at the base of the neck, and I'm going to use matte spirit gum to adhere the hair. I'm going to be using 2 different colors of Yak Hair, as beards usually have multiple colors throughout them. And I like using Yak Hair in particular as it's got a really nice coarseness and wiriness to it to replicate beard hair. This is my first time hand laying a beard, so I wasn't really sure how it was going to turn out. I'm definitely not an expert. If you do want some good thorough tutorials on beard laying, there's some really good ones on the Stan Winston School. So I'm using my comb to kind of flare out the hair before I push it into the spirit gum. You don't want too high a density of hair or it will end up looking really fake. So as I continue this, working from the bottom up, I'm also going to be using a darker colored Yak Hair throughout the beard as well. And as you can probably see, this is a pre-curled hair, which also helps. As you're getting to the edges of the beard, you want to really thin out the amount of hair that you're putting down, just to help it look realistic. Alright, so now that I am done putting the hair down, before I've cut it, it does look kind of ridiculous. I brushed through the beard with my comb to help get rid of some of that thickness, and all the hair that wasn't thoroughly glued down came out. Then I started to trim the beard hair, so this is not the best pair of scissors for the job. But yeah, just make sure you're very aware of where the beard ends and where the actor's skin begins. Once I had finished trimming the beard, I went back in around the face using a Maekup online product called Psoriasis Paste, which Duncan and Sean said they used quite a lot on Leo. It's meant to give us lovely cracked skin appearance, which would be really good for frostbite, but I realized while doing this that it is one thing to know what products are used, but an entirely different thing knowing how to properly apply them. I couldn't work out how to use this correctly, so it ended up looking more like just more dirt added around the face instead of cracked skin. And it was very, very difficult to remove the psoriasis paste from Alex's skin. So if you have any tips on psoriasis paste, hit me up. I do want to be able to actually use it properly in the future. Then I put some Ultra Ice Gel in the beard and the mustache, and I made it a bit more visible with the Maekup Online Dried Salt Paste, which adds some whiteness. I also put this in the eyebrows and a little bit on the face, and I think it is worth noting that this product does get quite a lot whiter and quite a lot more opaque as it dries, so it is worth keeping an eye on. Now they did use quite a few different bloods in the Revenant. I'm guessing some of them were for use through the blood tubing when he was attacked by the bear, some of it was for use on fresh wounds, some of it was for use on older dried up wounds. So for this, I'm using Robert Smith's Silicone Flow Blood and some Fleet Street blood in dark. And then as usual, I put down more blood than I need, and then I mop it all up to create some smears and a worn-in look. Next, I added some Ben Nye cream makeup around the eyes. It's a brownish grey colour, used to mimic the dark circles under the eyes, just to make Alex look a bit more tired. And to finish this off, I used another Maekup Online product that they used a lot on Leo's lips, which is Maekup Online Pus. They had it look amazing on the lips in the movie, and mine just looks kind of weird. So the placement and the way it's applied is also very important here. Then for the photos, I placed a faux fur fabric around Alex's shoulders, and we put him in front of a green screen. Now, I'm not gonna lie, with this much spirit gum and Maekup psoriasis paste on the skin, the cleanup was a bitch. So I started off with DC244 fluid to get underneath the Prosaide transfers, and then I moved onto Bluebird to get it off with both a brush and some cotton pads. It did take, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes to get all of this off Alex's skin. So yeah, there you have it, how to make your own Prosaide transfers using P-tier materials, just like they did for the Revenant on Leo, how to weather down somebody's face, and how to apply a fake beard using Yak Hair. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up and share it if you did. I would very much appreciate it. And if you're not already subscribed, you can subscribe here for updates on when new videos go live. Alright, take care guys, I'll see you again soon.